Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. So today we are going to be taking an early look into patch 9.11 over on the PBE server and see what Rad has already in store for us. As usual, if you end up enjoying this video, then don't forget to hit that like button, and this video will also be made in collaboration and edited by ProGuides. So it's a website that helps you improve your overall League of Legends gameplay and knowledge that is now free to use. Link is down below, check it out. So starting things off, let's talk about the changes coming over to Janna, a champion I'm sure we haven't really been seen changed or touched at all for quite a long time. Her base mana has been changed from starting at 372 and going up by 20 to now starting at 335 but going up by 45. Her attack speed has been increased and her attack speed per level has also been increased. This instantly tells me that, you know what, maybe, just maybe, Nash's Tooth is going to be an absolute core item. But moving along to her passive, you can see now that the cleave AP ratio has been slightly lowered, which is a little bit unfortunate. Now it has a new effect that grants her 20% movement speed on proc, which is good, especially if you're going for an auto attack focused build, because you can proc it and you can just keep moving and kiting properly. No longer does it give her attack speed after casting a spell, and no longer does it have 15% of AP as mana on proc. So in other words, less overall damage on this ability, but more utility. They're also doing some code changes to how her Q overall is going to function. The TLDR is it's going to have much more consistent targeting. It's going to have much more consistent QR resets, right? So that's going to actually kind of ensure that the QR will combine together properly and the R will reset, even if the Q is still in the air and you already use your R on the target, right? Which is pretty good. However, no longer will the RQ reset be actually functional. That is no longer a thing where you can usually R on the target, Q right before you land on the target. It's pretty much instant. It's almost impossible to dodge, and it still resets. That apparently, I guess, was a bug, but that's no longer a thing. And the final thing for her Q is the fact that, well, it now reveals Fog of War on missile tips, so you can finally use it to properly check bushes. Moving on to her E ability, the cooldown on this ability has actually been reduced by 6 seconds at every single rank, which is a lot. I mean, her E ability is, in my opinion, extremely underrated. I mean, it has fantastic engage potential. It has huge dueling potential because you go on your target, you eat them forward or to you, I guess, and you just stick on them. You just whack them away, especially with the new way it's going to be working with the extra movement speed while slowing their movement speed and probably going for things like Nash's more often. I mean, sounds pretty good. And apparently they're also thinking of buffing her ultimate, though it's not on the PBE server just yet, so we're not entirely sure what aspects or what part of her ultimate they're going to be buffing and how. But either way, some pretty solid buffs, I think, coming over to Janna. Again, I'm not 100% sure until I've actually seen them or tried them myself, but it doesn't sound that bad. Moving along, however, we have some changes coming over to Janna as well, starting with her W Zephyr. The base damage has been lowered. The cooldown has been changed from 8 at all ranks to now starting at 8, going all the way down to 6, which is an improvement, and the mana cost has also been increased by 10 at every single rank. So kind of the TLDR with this change is the fact that, well, as you rank up your W, it's going to be reduced in damage by quite a bit, right? But you can use it more often, but it costs more mana. So it's one of those things where every time you use it, it won't be as impactful now in the laning phase since you max it first usually to harass. But since you can use it more often, you can throw it out more often. But that also means that Janna will have to put herself in, I guess, somewhat danger, if you will, to use this ability more often and actually make it useful. So it's kind of a trade-off there. But moving on to her E ability, the shield itself has been increased by 10 for base. The cooldown has also been changed from starting at 18 going down to 10 to now starting at 16 but only going down to 12, so a little bit better early, a little bit worse later. But it has a new effect now as well that states the following: each Janna ability that slows or knocks an enemy champion airborne will reduce Eye of the Storm's cooldown by 20%. So as long as the Janna is actually playing really well, it's actually going to be much better. The shield is going to be an absolute buff, right? If you're landing your Qs, if you're harassing with your W rather than just sitting in the back spamming E and getting a drink, you're going to be rewarded for that. And I think that's the correct way to go. The only thing I don't think is correct is the fact that, well, if it's being reduced by 20% for every champion that's getting hit or airborne, I mean, Janna's Q can hit several champions. 20% is a lot. And I think that the reduction in her cooldown at the earlier ranks might be a little bit of an overbuff. But moving along to the next changes, we have a Malphite. Now, I did talk about it before, but let's go over it very quickly once again. Starting with his passive, it has a new effect where he regenerates his shield, which looks really, really cool. Moving on to his Q, which probably got one of the bigger changes, it now has a much faster missile speed. It goes faster to his target. It spawns a bit closer out of Malphite, so kind of more in front of him. So TLDR, it hits the target faster. No longer does it steal actual movement speed. Instead, now it just slows for a base amount, and Malphite gets movement speed increase for a base amount as well. And it has a new cool effect on the target when you actually hit them with Malphite's Q. But moving on to his W, it now is a completely new ability for the most part. It's called Thunderclap. It still has the passive where it does that AoE damage with the auto attacks, and the passive armor increased as well, but it now has a new active effect where after you use it, the next basic auto attack just does bonus damage, which scales off of AP and armor as well. In other words, this essentially gives him an actual W ability to use properly rather than being pretty much one of the most useless abilities in the game. So that's going to be a really good thing from Malphite players. It's a lot more interactive as well, and I think people that play this champion are going to be very happy with that change. Moving on to his ultimate, it now has a new visual effect in the base skin only that essentially creates a crater in the ground whenever you use it. Next up, we have the infamous Teemo rework on the PvE server once again. For how many weeks more, I don't really know, but let's go over it one more time very quickly as if we haven't already before. His base stats have been changed, the base mana regen has been increased, the mana regen per level increased, mana per level up increased as well, the base damage has been lowered, and his attack speed has been lowered. His passive now is essentially his old E ability that just does dot damage but increased per other poisons on that target, which includes Teemo's and other champions as well from his team. His Q ability is essentially the exact same, just does less damage, but it's now considered a poison debuff. His W no longer breaks stealth. His E ability is his old passive that is now a toggle or on command invisibility, where he gets extra range while being invisible. He can be invisible forever while in bushes, but only a few seconds while out of bushes. He gets the attack speed whenever coming out of the stealth, and that essentially is it. And then moving on to his ultimate Noxious Traps, you can see here that the base damage and overall damage of this ability has been lowered across the board, but however, he can now have more max ammo counts of the ultimate shrooms as you rank it up. So the TLDR of the Teemo changes is, well, he's not as strong when it comes to nuking people across the map whenever they walk into a shroom if you're building full AP, but with that being said, he's also much stronger as a split pusher and playing around the shrooms that he sets around his current location. Next up, we also have a mini rework coming over to Wukong. Now, I did make a full gameplay of this. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend you do so, but let's go over it very quickly. Starting off with his passive, his stone skin, which is the current one he has been slightly redesigned, but for the most part, it is still similar in concept. Whenever 3 or plus enemy champions are visible within 1400 units, Wukong gains bonus armor and MR equal to base 20 plus 2 per level plus 0.2 times his bonus MR/MR respectively. The bonuses last for 6 seconds and renews if enemies remain near. Currently uses the Gargoyle Stoneplate activation visual effects for when it's up, but that's obviously temporarily. But he also has a new passive on top of that as well called Crushing Blows that essentially applies stacks of Crushing Blows to a target whenever Wukong or his clones deal damage to that target. They give you a 4% increase in damage to the target with every single stack, stacking up to 5 times. So that in itself is pretty sweet, but moving on to his Q, you can see it's retitled Magical Golden Staff, which is a questionable name, but the effects are as follows. Now has a passive effect where Wukong gets bonus range on his next auto attack after he uses any spell, not just his Q ability. The damage has been changed from dealing bonus physical damage to now starting at 20 base damage, only going up to 80, which is almost half of what it used to be, but it now scales off of 20% AD and it's magical damage, which is the biggest thing. But that's not it. It also heals Wukong, scaling off of 0.25 AD, but is halved on minions. Both all that being said and done, it no longer shreds armor, so a bit more sustained whenever you use it. Again, really nice new passive effect as well, which gives him extra range on auto attacks, which makes his all-in burst combo much better in my opinion, because you E, auto attack, Q, auto attack, because don't forget, you activate your Q, you instantly get that increase in range, which is fantastic. But the biggest change here is the fact that it does magical damage, which essentially means that maybe going lethality isn't all that good on Wukong anymore because it no longer will affect the damage your Q deals, so might be different builds. Moving on to his W. Now in core concept, it's the same ability, but now he actually creates a clone that attacks rather than just standing there like an idiot, right? Which is huge because this not only applies to his passive stacks, which is fantastic, but it makes it much more deceptive. It deals 50% of Wukong's damage instead of exploding at the end end of its life to nearby enemies, which is pretty cool. The clone lifespan has also been increased, you can see it there. And now he's much more of a trickster, because when you press S on Wukong to stop still to try and trick them to use your W, it's much more like, I guess, harder to tell if it's the real Wukong or not the real Wukong, because the way Wukong now stops is the exact same way his W creates the clone. It looks the same, exactly the same. So it's much more deceptive. Also, whenever he uses his W, he dashes forward more than he currently does, which is fantastic. The cooldown has also been reduced as well. Then move on to his E ability. You can see here that it is also more deceptive, because the other two clones that he sends out on the little Nimbus cloud to attack its target looks a lot more like Wukong, and they're also interactable clones as well that look just like him as well too. So you can pretty much block abilities, people can target them as well, and it's just harder to tell which of the three is the real Wukong. With that being said, however, the AD ratio has been lowered from 0.8 to 0.5, which is actually a decent amount, so that's a fairly big nerf in terms of damage. And last but not least, we have his ultimate Cyclone, where it's essentially the same ability, but a nice little quality of life change to where you don't have to press R again to cancel. Instead, you can either press R if you want, or you can use any other ability while you're in the middle of your ultimate, and it'll instantly cancel and instantly use your ability, making it a little bit faster. And the final change is going to be towards Zac, where essentially he's getting a rework. Starting with his Q stretching strikes, the cooldown has been changed from being starting at 13 to 9, now starting at 15 to 9, so a little bit longer at the earlier ranks. His W now does 2% of target's max health per 100 ability power as magical damage. In game it's currently 4%. And then his ultimate is the part that's essentially reworked, where it's pretty much his old ultimate, Let's Bounce. He just bounces 4 times, gets movement speed over the duration, deals a bunch of damage, can't use his Q or E ability during it, but he can still use his W. And yeah, I mean, it's essentially his old ultimate. I don't know why Rise decided to bring it back. Maybe there's a reason for it, but they are. And last but definitely not least, we have a new skin coming out, a little Demon Tristana. Rad before, a few weeks ago, made that post where people can vote on which Tristana skin they want, right? Little Demon Tristana was the victor. I personally voted for that one, so I'm personally pretty happy. It looks unbelievably gorgeous in game and the splash art, so very good stuff from Riot Games. Their skins have been absolutely on point lately, so big kudos to those people. But that is it for this video, guys. And there you have it, the biggest changes already in patch 9.11 on the PBE server. Let me know what you think about them down below, which changes you think are the biggest ones and all that stuff. But either way, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, share with your friends, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.